Hello and welcome to Here's to Your Health. I'm your host, Veggie Patty, and it is my privilege to bring you the latest information on healthy living. May is Gluten-Free Awareness Month, and in honor of that, I wanted to dedicate both episodes to gluten issues, especially since gluten is such a hot topic in the news these days. So on today's episode, we have a guest, Theresa Edmunds, who is a certified health counselor, and she is going to answer some basic questions on gluten issues and gluten-free living. On May 19th, we're going to be filming the next episode at my very first annual gluten-free extravaganza that will be held right here in Wyandotte. I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about that later in the episode. So for right now, I'd like to introduce Theresa and welcome her to the show. So welcome, Theresa.
Thank you.
So Theresa, you are a certified health counselor. So can you tell the viewers what is that, first of all?
Sure. Basically, I work with individuals and families. Sometimes people are coming to me with a health concern, like gluten intolerance, and they really don't know where to start. Sometimes they're just not feeling well, and they want to feel better. And so we identify what's happening with them and put them on a path so that they can change their lifestyle and start to feel better.
That's great. Now, you teach some classes at Total Health Foods in Wyandotte, and you're doing some instructing at Monroe Community College, correct?
That's right, in their lifelong learning program. Okay. And those classes wrap up at the end of May, and then I'll be starting there again in September. And I run classes once a month at Total Health through the year.
Okay, and then you also are a new columnist for the News Herald, is that correct?
That's right.
And what is your column about?
It's called Food for Thought, and it ranges from nutrition to natural living principles. The column, the little preview I'll give you, the next column will be about planning your own organic garden for the summer, so sort of seasonal topics, whatever's relevant.
Okay, great. So tell the viewers a little bit about how you got involved in gluten issues and gluten-free living.
Well, about almost 2.5 years ago, our son was diagnosed as being gluten intolerant. And in that process, he was diagnosed as having 10 different food allergies, which meant that he was producing antibodies against 10 different foods. At that point, we did an elimination diet, and we also did some further testing, which indicated that he was deficient in all minerals across the board. So at that point, I started to do some more research, and I determined that he had something called leaky gut syndrome, and went back to the doctor, and she concurred. And so we went gluten-free, but we went one step further, and we decided to do a grain and sugar-free diet for 2 years to heal the leaky gut syndrome, basically by giving the digestive system a break. And that diet's called the Gut and Psychology Syndrome diet.
Okay, well, great. So like we said, Theresa has a son that has gluten intolerance, and for the viewers that don't know me very well, I actually have gluten allergies, and I actually am a grain-free vegan, so I'm following a very similar diet. So between the two of us, we definitely can answer questions about gluten today. So let's just start off with a very basic question. Theresa, what is gluten?
Gluten is the protein in wheat, barley, and rye. And the other issue can sometimes be oats. So there's cross-contamination issues. There's some debate between doctors whether or not the protein in oats is actually very closely related to the protein in wheat, rye, and barley. Other people think that it's more of a cross-contamination issue in the fields, potentially, and then obviously, you know, when the oats are being processed. So some people who have gluten issues can eat oats and some people can't. I always tell people to look for gluten-free oats or look for the Irish oatmeal because they don't have the cross-contamination issue in Ireland.
Okay. So now there's a lot of controversy going around as to why all of a sudden do we have all of these gluten issues and all of these gluten allergies and celiac disease popping up, because if you think about it, you know, our grandparents ate wheat and our ancestors all ate wheat. So what are your thoughts on why gluten is all of a sudden the big enemy that's out there?
Right, that's what everybody wants to know, because a generation ago we never heard anything about gluten, and now it's gluten, gluten, gluten. And even people that don't have an issue are starting to become aware of all of these gluten-free products out on the market. Basically, wheat has changed a lot in the last 50 years. The thought was that if they could increase the yield on wheat, that we could stamp out world hunger. And so they started to hybridize wheat to the point that the wheat head became very large. And they hybridized it further because once the wheat head was so heavy that it would cause the stalks to crack and break, they had to shrink the wheat down. So I always say to people, you know, we think of amber waves of grain. There's no more amber waves of grain blowing. You know, wheat is about 18 inches tall now. And in this process, it became very hardy and very pest resistant. You know, the key word being hardy, maybe a little too hardy even for our digestive systems. In the process of hybridizing it, it became very high in gluten. So the protein content increased exponentially. Not only that, but some research indicates that there's at least 14 new strains of gluten that was never present in wheat previously.
Okay,
so that would be one of the reasons. You know, the other issue is that we eat so much more wheat than we ever did before.
Right. There's wheat in everything. There's wheat, and we're going to talk about that a little later. There's hidden sources of wheat foods that you don't think contain wheat, other products that contain wheat that you wouldn't think,
Absolutely.
and we're just getting bombarded with it.
Right.
And so for a lot of people, especially if you're sensitive or prone to sensitivities, your body just can't handle it anymore.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about the difference between gluten intolerance and gluten allergies. There's actually a spectrum, and you have people who are gluten sensitive, gluten allergies, and then you have gluten intolerance. So since your son was diagnosed with gluten intolerance, which is celiac, can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. You know, basically, our son didn't have any symptoms. It was more a result of, okay, he's showing 10 different food allergies, he's deficient in minerals, what's happening here, let's get some more information. So often people that are gluten intolerant aren't actually having any symptoms. You know, like you said, a spectrum, there's a spectrum within gluten intolerance as well. So there's people who are having no symptoms who can be gluten intolerant, and then at the other end of the spectrum we're talking about celiac disease, which is a very serious disease, which is multi-symptomatic disease, and also a gateway autoimmune disease. So it actually falls within the autoimmune category. And when I say multi-symptomatic, it means that there can be all kinds of issues that are seemingly unrelated to digestive problems. So, you know, arthritis, rashes, all kinds of symptoms. But then gateway means that it can actually cause other autoimmune diseases to come on. And that's where it becomes really serious. Because we're talking about things like rheumatoid arthritis, we're talking about lupus, MS, even some kinds of cancers. And unfortunately, many people are never diagnosed as celiac. They're diagnosed with the secondary autoimmune disease. And some doctors don't even realize that celiac can be combined with these diseases. I see people in my practice who come to me with a secondary autoimmune disease and no one has ever talked to them about gluten.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because if you're looking at gluten allergies and gluten sensitivities, a gluten allergy is actually very rare, like a true allergy to gluten. That's, you know, somebody like any other true food allergy where they would actually go into anaphylaxis and have some very serious consequences if they came in contact with it. And of course, a lot of people like me who are gluten sensitive, we tend to say allergy because that's just the term people use, but the gluten sensitivity, you can have a whole range of reactions. I definitely react immediately, whereas a gluten intolerant person may not react immediately to being exposed to the gluten. It develops over time, whereas somebody like me who is sensitive to it, I'll react immediately as soon as I come into contact with it. But also people who have these sensitivities and different food sensitivities, they too tend to lean more towards the autoimmune gateway that you were talking about, to have secondary autoimmune issues as a result of these sensitivities. So the short of it is, if you, first of all, if you feel that you're reacting to gluten, you want to try to talk to a doctor or talk to a practitioner to figure out if that's the cause of your issues. Or if you have other issues going on and you suspect that it might be gluten, again, you want to talk to them. So regardless of if you're intolerant or if you're allergic, if you do have an issue with gluten, you definitely need to do something about it. because it will lead to other health issues like we were talking about.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about with kids and the gluten allergy or the gluten intolerance. So there's a lot more than just health issues. Well, first of all, talk about some of the unique health issues that a child may have because they're developing.
Well, first of all, let's talk about maybe for a minute just about why we're seeing it so often in kids, right? Because we're thinking, well, I didn't develop this until I was older. Why does my child now have it? Unfortunately, this generation of kids are much more susceptible to everything as we're seeing, asthma, allergies, food allergies, autism, because the way that we have eaten our entire lives, mostly processed food, far too much wheat, has actually caused us to have children who are compromised. And so these issues are showing up in them at a very young age. And, all kinds of problems from this. From when you have an issue with gluten, often there's some damage in the small intestine. And we have something called villi in our small intestine. And they are sort of hair-like substances that as the food passes over them, they absorb the vitamins and minerals and take that into our bloodstream, and then our blood takes that into the rest of our cells in our body that need them. And actually a great analogy I heard for that was that when it's healthy, it looks like a shag carpet, and when it's not healthy, it looks like a Berber rug.
Okay.
They flatten out, and that's where you start to have an issue, because instead of having this much surface for the food to pass over and the nutrients to be absorbed, you now have this much surface. And so these kids have a malabsorption issue, which was exactly what was going on with our son when he came back deficient in every mineral across the board, which is a scary diagnosis. So, you seek to heal that damage, and then hopefully they're starting to absorb their vitamins and minerals better. Obviously, as you asked me, that's a huge issue for children. It's serious enough for an adult to have malabsorption issues. But for children, that can lead to malnourishment. Their bodies are growing so quickly. They need those vitamins and minerals. Our brains are dependent on that. We don't always think of that, but our brain is another organ. It needs nutrients too. And so we start to see learning issues. We see all kinds of behavioral problems with children who are reacting to gluten or children who have this malabsorption issue.
Okay, and that's something for parents to consider. A lot of times parents may just think that the child is acting out, or that
Absolutely.
And it could be that, but there could be a medical issue, and you have to get to the right doctor to be able to discover what that issue is and to diagnose it and to get a treatment.
I would say that's almost epidemic today. I've had the opportunity to volunteer a lot in my son's classroom, and you see children, and you talk to a teacher who's been teaching for 30 years, and she'll tell you the differences. But we sort of live in this bubble where we think it's normal because that's what we see today. You can't go back a generation and be a mom a generation ago and see what the kids were like. But I definitely think that a lot of things that are being attributed to behavioral issues have a lot to do with the foods that we're eating today.
Okay, so a lot of people want to know, how do I get a diagnosis for this? How do I know if I suspect it? What do I do? What kind of a doctor I go to? What type of a test should I get?
Right, well, that's the tough part, because there's not a lot of doctors who completely understand this. And we're seeing celiac centers pop up around the country, usually affiliated with some big university hospital. And so they have a little bit more knowledge. A lot of people are very frustrated by the time they get a diagnosis. They think that they've had it for a long time. They're looking things up on the internet, as we all tend to do, and self-diagnose. But often if you see yourself in a lot of those symptoms, gluten could be a problem. As I said, gluten has changed significantly in the last 50 years. Maybe it's really no longer fit for human consumption. And so don't be surprised, people shouldn't be surprised if they see themselves in the symptoms. You can obviously go to a specialist, and some of the tests that they can run, one is a blood test to see if you have your body's making antibodies against gluten. In other words, seeing gluten as a foreign invader and making antibodies to protect yourself. Another test would be to have a biopsy done, which is a little bit more invasive. Those were the tests that they were looking for originally to diagnose celiacs. And some doctors like to look at a third test, which is a blood test, to see if you have the genetic component that you could have celiac. Celiac seems to be an autoimmune disease that we have the genes for, but it can lay dormant until it's sort of turned on. And so often there's an emotional component. Most people that are diagnosed as celiac can actually pinpoint a time when they were either fairly ill, they had a big move, they changed jobs, there was a loss of a loved one, and suddenly their health took a turn for the worse.
Right. And for people that are gluten sensitive, it's actually a little bit more difficult to get a diagnosis because, first of all, it's not going to show up on an allergy test necessarily. Right. So a lot of times, what I tell people and what I ended up doing for myself is I worked with somebody and I just did an elimination diet where, you know, you cut it out right. and you see how you feel when you're cutting it out, and then at some point you need to add it back in and see what type of reactions you're getting to see if you're sensitive to it or not. Right. And so that's something, so if you're not finding the right doctor or you're not finding somebody that can help you and you really think it could be gluten, there are people like Theresa or myself that can assist you in developing an elimination diet to help you figure out if you may be reacting to gluten.
Absolutely, and that's something I recommend to a lot of people. You know, even if you think that gluten is the last thing that it could be, if you don't feel well, take it out of your diet for a few weeks and see if you feel better. And I tell people the same thing with dairy. You know, dairy can be, casein is another protein that people react to. It's the same thing. People think, oh, no, not me, and they take it out and they feel wonderful. So it's absolutely worth doing an elimination diet.
Yeah, and a lot of times the gluten and the dairy, from what I found, have gone hand in hand along with sugar. So I kind of call that the trio, where you've got the gluten and the dairy and the sugar sensitivities that are going on with people that are causing a lot of issues.
Right, and soy can be a part of that too, especially for kids that are on the spectrum, on the autism spectrum. Right. Casein and gluten used to be sort of the autism diet, but they found that a lot of kids still weren't showing breakthrough until they pulled out soy, and then all of a sudden those kids just settled right down.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, so let's tell the viewers a little bit about some like helpful tips if they want to start being gluten-free or they're trying to live gluten-free. What types of products should they be avoiding? Where are the hidden sources of gluten?
Well, we like to think that it's in food, and it is. Beer is one that has gluten. The obvious choices that we mentioned already, wheat, oats, rye, rye and barley. You have to be aware of the derivatives of those things because malt is made with barley, and so anything that's maltodextrin, anything like that. Gluten is not required to be labeled. So you're not going to look at the ingredient label and see gluten conveniently labeled for you. So the main thing is that you really need to, it's a good idea to get a list of sort of other names that gluten goes by, but you need to be aware of the things that you wouldn't think it's in. It can be in things like ice cream as a thickener or a stabilizer, in chocolate, even non-food products. That's a big one that people don't realize. I have had many people come to me and they've been gluten-free. They think they've been gluten-free for a long time, and then we start talking about the fact that it's most often in toothpaste. It can be in the adhesive on envelopes. The list goes on and on. Right. Body care products, that's a big one. Cosmetics, especially for someone who has a sensitivity, because that can really show a symptom if you're putting it on your skin.
People don't realize that the skin is the largest organ, and so with the skin, you're actually you're absorbing it through your skin into your body. So they think, oh, it's just a lotion, it's no big deal, but it is a big deal because you are still getting it. And
absolutely.
And some other sources that people may not realize is One is, like you said, it's not always labeled as gluten, so you need to find out what the names are, but you can look for wheat on a label. Soy sauce has wheat in it. A lot of people don't realize that soy sauce has the wheat in it.
That's true.
And a lot of your medications, they have wheat in them, or in the gel caps. They contain
supplements.
Wheat. Yes. So a lot of times people don't see all of those things. And I mentioned earlier in the show that I am putting on a gluten-free extravaganza towards the end of this month, which is Sunday, May 19th from 12 to 5. It is going to be at the Downriver Italian American Hall in Wyandotte. That's on Biddle. And Theresa is actually going to be one of the speakers at the expo. And the expo is free to the public. And it's really just to get more information out to the public about gluten-free living and gluten-free issues. We have a lot of good speakers coming. I'll be speaking about living with food sensitivities. We have Dr. James Neuenschwander from the Bioenergy Medical Center. He is going to be talking about food sensitivities, the causes, connections, and cures. We have an enzyme therapist that's also coming from Ann Arbor. His name is Mark Rojak, and he's going to be talking about enzyme therapy and how you can use this to help combat food sensitivities and intolerances. And then Theresa will be talking about gluten-free kids.
Right.
And we have Kathleen Gunther from Total Health Foods and Laura Noble, who is the owner of Cousin Mary Jane. They will be doing demonstrations and talking about simple and easy gluten-free baking. To round it off, we also have a vet that's coming, Dr. Christine Budo, and she is going to be talking about how to use food to treat diseases in pets, specifically help pets go on a grain-free diet and why you might want to do that. So we have a lot of great information that's going to be presented at the expo. Like I said, it's free to the public, and it's Sunday, May 19th from 12 to 5 p.m. at the Downriver Italian American Hall in Wyandotte. So I hope to see you guys there. We have a lot of great door prizes too. I know Theresa is donating a great door prize, and we have so many door prizes. We'll be able to give them out all day.
Yeah, it should be a great event.
Yes. So we hope you come down and learn more about gluten-free living. Is there anything else that you would like to mention to the viewers about if they have gluten issues?
I don't think so. I think we've covered a lot of the basics. There's a real grieving process, I think, when people find out that they have an issue with gluten. And we have a real attachment to our food in this country, right? We think of it as comfort food. That's a real term. But we don't always tend to think of it as fuel for the body. And so I think that once you get through the grieving process, if you can take the time to realize that you can actually improve your health exponentially through the process, and when you're feeling overwhelmed, I think it's really helpful to get some support. I think that that's a big part of it. There are support groups out there. There's other people. You're not alone. You're not the only one who's going through this. A lot of people have been through it and come out on the other side feeling better than they have in years.
Yeah, and that's something that I'll be covering in my talk as well, as about that process and the psychological aspects that you go through when you're diagnosed and you can't eat the food anymore. So I'll be talking a little bit about that in my speech.
Good. So looking forward to it.
So I hope that we are just about out of time here. So I hope that you have learned some basic information about gluten-free living and some gluten issues. And if you're looking for some more information on gluten-free living, please come on down to our expo on Sunday, May 19th. We hope to see you there. Remember that no matter the cards you were dealt or your current state of health, you have the power to take charge of your health. So never give up and never stop learning. The solution you seek may be just around the corner. I'd like to ask Theresa to join me in a toast to our guest. This is going to be our tradition on the show. And today we have Theresa is joining me in solidarity since I do have food sensitivities. Total Health Foods has once again provided cucumber juice for us. So to the viewers, I wish you a wonderful today and an even better tomorrow. Here's to your health.